let's have a talk about ivy. Now, I'm not talking about the leaves of three of poison ivy that a lot of people fear. I'm talking about English ivy, which to some people should be feared just as much as its trifoliate friend. You see, English ivy has a good side and a bad side. English ivy grows in dense shade. I've seen it growing underneath magnolia trees. I've even seen it growing underneath kudzu sometimes. It can grow in any soil throughout Georgia. It's drought tolerant. It spreads very readily. And in some cases where there's nothing else that'll control erosion, English ivy is a great choice. The problem is that English ivy, if left uncontrolled, can be a real problem in your landscape. Look behind me and you'll see what I mean. What do you see? Nothing but English ivy, a couple of privet hedges, and maybe a couple of pine trees there. We have basically an ivy desert. No ferns, no native plants, no flowers, nothing but English ivy growing in this area because it was let to grow and never controlled. Another problem with English ivy is the effect that it has on trees when it grows up tree trunks. You can see this pine tree right here. Once upon a time, it was a vertical pine tree, but then the English ivy was allowed to grow up it. Came a big thunderstorm and bangity boom, down comes the pine tree because the ivy leaves acted as a sail. When you have a ice storm or a big rainstorm, the ivy leaves hold that weight, and the tree may not be ready, may not be capable of holding the weight of the ice or the snow or the rain, and the limbs fall out of the tree, and the tree itself then may fall down. Of course, ivy also, as it gets up into the top of the tree, causes the lower limbs to be shaded out, and so they fail and fall from the tree as well. So how do you control English ivy once it's gotten out of control in your landscape? You know, I wish there were a chemical I could tell you, you spray it on English ivy and the ivy will be gone. But actually, there's not. A couple of chemicals that I've tried and I do use on occasion are the chemical glyphosate. That's the active ingredient in Roundup. And I also use sometimes triclopyr, and that's the active ingredient in Brush Be Gone. Both of them, though, take a long time to kill the English ivy. You spray it on the leaves, you wait 3 weeks, and finally you see some yellowing, some spots on the leaf, and maybe a week or two later the leaves begin to die and fall off. But a couple more weeks and you'll see that there are more sprouts of the English ivy that's come up from places as it's rooted, and you'll have to come back and spray those too. Honestly, the best way to control at least a small patch of English ivy is to pull it up. You and some friends get out there, pull the vines out of the ground. One of you take clippers and just clip it. You clip, there's some right there where it's rooted. Pull more, clip where it's rooted. And pretty soon, you'll have a great big ball of vine that you can put out on the street, give it to the garbage man, and let him take it away. This is not a plant that I would put on my compost pile because obviously it will re-root there, and then you've got even more problems in your landscape. And what do you do when English ivy has started climbing a tree? Well, come with me back to the forest and I'll show you a way. The good news is that ivy is not a parasite. Even though it has great, big, hairy vines and has a lot of little rootlets that adhere to the bark, the rootlets do not go through the bark and suck the sap of the tree. So if you cut the vine down low, the top of the vine up in the tree eventually is going to die. Now, it may be a month before you see those leaves up there start to turn brown, but eventually the upper part of the vine will die if you just clip the vine out. But what you'll find as you're clearing the vine off of the tree is there'll be great big vines that you barely can get your clippers through. So what do you do then? Well, you got to clip it. Sometimes a saw is not the greatest answer because it saws into the bark of other trees, not the thick bark of this pine tree right here. So here's a trick on how to get that vine out so that you can get it off of the tree. Use a pry bar, just a flat pry bar, and put it behind the vine and hit it a couple of times with a hammer. Then you can pull the whole vine away from the tree and take your pruner and you can clip it off. Now, I always try to take a big section out of the vine. I want to make sure that behind the vine there aren't any little vines that are hiding there. So once I have this section taken off the trunk of the tree, I know that this part right here is still living, but this part up here is dead. Now, obviously, I'd try to take this off down closer to the ground to make sure that the vine is not climbing up the pine tree. But there is a way to make sure that this vine does not resprout anymore, and that is to use a paintbrush and some of that undiluted glyphosate, undiluted Roundup. We can take the paintbrush and put it in our container right there and paint it onto the stem. By painting the Roundup onto the stem of the plant, it'll be sucked down through the stem at least a couple of feet. It'll keep it from resprouting. You can use this same trick when you're trying to keep stumps from privet hedge or sweet gum or maple from sprouting too. When you cut them down, paint the stump with Roundup. Now, another thing that I want to show you about ivy before we leave is the change in ivy leaves as they mature over time. Come with me back to the tree and I'll show you that. We're all familiar with the lobed leaves of English ivy when we buy it at a nursery. Sometimes they have 3 and maybe even 5 lobes on a single leaf. But did you know that this is the juvenile form of English ivy? And after the ivy vine has been growing on a vertical surface for several years, the lobes will disappear. The leaves will change. They'll be rounded, having very few, if no, lobes at all. It's this adult English ivy that has flowers and berries on it, and these berries are what birds can eat, spreading the English ivy even further. Another interesting thing about adult English ivy is if you take a cutting of the adult form and root it, it'll grow as a small shrub, not as a vine as the juvenile form does. You can take the shrub, put it in the same heavy shade that you would the vine, and it tolerates it just fine. English ivy, it's a non-native exotic. It can be a friend or it can be a foe. Just be aware before you plant it. If you give it an inch, it can take your yard.
Woo, we barely made that. I'm getting a low battery warning.
Whee! Let's go.